Mr. Putin, one of the very interesting items on the agenda was the meeting with Mr. Obama. We know that you discussed Ukraine. What other topics did you discuss? And the sanctions.
Yes, we did touch upon the issue of economic sanctions, but just briefly. We didn't discuss anything in detail. I don't think there's any use in it. It was not our initiative to impose those sanctions. And apparently this is an issue for the future, to discuss the removal of those sanctions and a full-fledged improvement and revitalizing of our relations, including our relationship with the US. Even though our trade turnover with the US is minuscule. It used to be 28 billion and now it's gone down to 22 billion. So honestly speaking, trade and economic relations with the US are not at all that important for Russia at all. As for restrictions in the area of technology exports, they've always been there and they've never been totally lifted. There were informal limitations that stayed in place even during the best period of Russian-US relations in the early and mid-1990s, when seemingly there was such a rosy relationship between our two countries, and there were no signs of any worsening, of any deterioration. But we do believe that the present situation is not normal, and we are in favor of restoring our relationship with the US. But as for the issues we discussed today, indeed we did discuss Syria and our possible cooperation on this track. Both the US and Russia are interested in fighting terrorism. I, for one, sensed true interest on the part of the American president. I think he sincerely wants to see some viable results in combating terrorism and resolving the conflict in Syria. And of course the second issue we discussed is the situation in Ukraine.
Mr. Putin, can you clarify about the relations with Japan? Shinzo Abe in Vladivostok asked you to take the responsibility, take the blame, take the responsibility for the territorial problem. There were different views expressed, and when you said about what Japan wants and what Russia is ready to do.
Let's not look for red lines. Let's not head for a dead end. Let's walk along in an open two-way street. As for addressing each other by first name, we are on first name terms with the Japanese Prime Minister. When we speak in private, we address each other by name. As for his emotional speech, as you say, he is a brilliant politician. He is a very charismatic politician, and he was in his element while speaking at the summit in Vladivostok. But the essence of his appearance really wasn't about that, but rather about him proceeding with his initiative about these 8 areas that we were to outline as regards Russian-Japanese economic relations. It is very interesting. I just don't want to waste your time today. You can look it up in the documents together. As for the red lines, like I said, we shouldn't really speak of red lines. We've come back to this negotiation, like I said many times in the past. I can remind you of this agreement of 1956. The Soviet Union received these territories as a result of World War II, and those results they were finalized and fixed by international documents. But the Soviet Union itself, in 1956, following a painstaking negotiation, signed an agreement with Japan, which essentially says in its Article 9, if I'm not mistaken, that 2 southern islands are shall be handed over to Japan. 2. Since none of you are, since not all of us are legal experts here, and I used to work in the area of international law, even though that was rather international civil law, but it did say, the agreement did say shall be transferred, but it did not specify the conditions, the specifics. It did not even state who would have sovereignty over those territories. It was left for further work, for finalization. But following the signing of the agreement and following its ratification by the parliaments of both countries, I would like to emphasize, Japan refused to deliver, to actually implement this agreement. It believed that it wanted all 4 islands, not just 2 of them, and so essentially this agreement was left ineffective, and it was later, years later, that the Soviet Union declared it also would not abide by this agreement. Later, Japan said they wanted to go back to discussing this agreement, and we agreed, and this is where it is now. So it was 1956, and when the Soviet Union was willing to give back 2 of the islands it had received at the end of the war. But the conditions were not specified, the specifics were not laid out in that agreement. There were issues remaining with issues of security, economic activities, and so on. There were humanitarian issues related with the situation, and we are looking at the entire body of those issues right now.